All right, we're a go.
All right. Hey, it's Friday night and I'm in San Diego. So you know me, I get out of town any chance I get. So I'm happy to be down in San Diego. It's a rainy day though, so haven't done a whole lot.
Oh,
It's kind of windy up there, so I assume no bike rides today.
yeah. So I think the wind is going to hit you, and then it's going to come over this way. And we got a little bit of rain today. I was swimming at the multi-gen. I was worried they were going to close because of the rain.
So do they close that when it rains hard?
No, but that they sometimes are a little quick to close. So
Yeah. You know what really
For
bothers me,
lighting.
since we're talking about
yeah,
swimming is the city pools in Las Vegas close when there's lightning.
yeah. Even
The
the
county
indoor
pools
pools.
don't.
Hmm.
Or something like that. It's like one of them, I can't remember which is which. And I'm like, well, what difference does it make?
Yeah,
If I'm at a city pool, I'm gonna be in trouble. But
yeah.
anyways, so happy weekend to you both, and the big weekend. Obviously, we get the time change coming up.
Yeah.
Triathlon training gets a little bit better
Yeah.
come Sunday. We have a special guest once again. Ron Gallagher is joining us, so we're going to talk some therapy stuff tonight, and we're going to talk about swimming and shoulders and injuries and becoming better swimmers. So tonight is going to really focus on shoulders and swimming. So we're going to start out tonight talking about just kind of why. I guess we'll start talking about why swimmers get injured. And why the shoulder is the area that tends to be the problem the most. And then we'll get into some ways we can potentially mitigate that.
I know.
Ron can't help himself, he wants to jump in and answer all the questions.
This is one of my most passionate topics. I'm
You and me both,
finding
by the
myself
way.
more and more the arm care specialist, and that means baseball, softball, swimming, volleyball, and now the UFC. But shoulder health and just talking about it all day. It's an acute versus chronic workload problem.
Yep, ATL versus CTL.
That means the yardage that your shoulder's prepared for gets yardage it's not prepared for, and it starts to hurt.
Yep. So this is such a good thing to talk about. So let's start just talking about, so we mentioned two things as far as training load, acute versus chronic, but I think we need to just make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page as far as understanding the difference between an acute and a chronic injury, and the fact that most of our swimming injuries are chronic. You want to dig into that, Ron?
Yeah, so the duration that the symptoms have been there, and we're really going to define injury as any impairments that force you to change your training, whether that's not trained because it hurts or hurts enough to seek a coach and back off. Anything that sort of deters your training, we're gonna define as injury. And if it happened within the last couple of weeks, that's acute. And if it's longer than that, we would call that chronic. But we find that the majority of acute shoulder injuries are not swimming injuries. And John? We were just talking about pool deck injuries.
That's right. Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed this out, because I think it's important to define injury. And from a research side, when we look at the papers in any injury area, we often have to look at how the authors are defining injury. So thank you for putting that definition forward. And the literature, we have to put in different bins based on how authors define injury, because the definition may be quite different between papers. And I think the important part is it's not a binary thing. It's not a yes, you're injured, no, you're not injured. It's more of a continuum. So thank you.
Right.
Now, I'll throw in one other piece here. If you've been doing triathlon as long as John and I have, you're almost always a little bit injured.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the nature of trying to do three sports and try to do three sports well.
When you're trying to go long and you're trying to go fast.
Yep. You can't have it both ways all the time.
Carry some symptoms with you.
Yep. So that being said, let's talk specifically then about shoulder injuries. So you also mentioned acute versus chronic training load. That's, I think some people are pretty
Yes.
familiar with that in the concept of training and using like training peaks and even into like bike stuff with Hunter Allen's book and the training and racing with a power meter book. They go into a lot of depth on
Right.
acute chronic training load. Do you want to just give us the I don't know, 1,000-foot view of acute versus chronic training loads so we kind of have a context of where we're at?
Yeah, so in the context of swimmers, let's say, for example, you're a Olympic distance specialist and you're used to swimming 2,000 meters 3 times a week, and you do that for months. That's what I would call your chronic workload. If you decide that that's not enough and you're going to up your swim training, say 500 meters a session, now your weekly load is 2,000 more meters. That's your acute workload. And any change in acute workload versus chronic workload that's more than 135%, you're pretty much guaranteed to be injured. So what your shoulder is prepared for versus how you're using it has a certain threshold, and it's right around 135%. And if you don't have the preparation for that change, then you're bound to be injured.
I'm going to just jump in here because I think that that was a good way to put it and gave us some real numbers. But I think that there also has to be a piece of this we need to think about with intensity, right? It's not just, when we talk about load, it's not just duration. It's not just, hey, you did this many yards. It can also
Right.
be this many yards at this intensity. And that, I think that's a big thing to put in.
The more components of intensity you add in, the more likely it is to be an abrupt change.
Yeah. But if I just go in and I do 500 and I do, let's say I do 10 50s hard and I get out, that's not as much necessarily as a load as, let's say, 3,000 easy, right? And so
Right.
we have to think about it in two metrics here. We have to think about intensity and duration. And when we build our acute and chronic training load, there has to be an understanding that those two components play. And when you talk about 135%, or any metric, you have to pay attention to intensity and volume. And I think
sure.
you'd agree with me that the kind of rule of thumb we always kind of go through is try not to increase both at the same time, right?
Yeah,
So, or if you do it really slow, both at the same time.
For sure. And when I have somebody who reports to the clinic injured, usually 3 weeks ago is where the injury was.
Yeah, of course.
There was a change in volume that coincided with the change of intensity, and the amount that change occurred, the shoulder just couldn't withstand, got irritated. Now they're here and they can't swim.
Yep, agreed.
Or difficulty swimming.
Yeah. Okay, so we've given some metrics and we've given some numbers. So that being said, what is it like? What is the weak link, and why is the shoulder the weak link often?
The discussion that I have with just about every swimmer who walks in the door, and I have, a lot of the club swimmers in town. I do a lot of strength training and rehab in the club swimmers in town, on top of the age group triathletes. And there's 3 things that help a swimmer swim faster. It's drag, it's water feel, and it's the amount of water that you can move. So when those 3 things are happening, we think of feel as like, how many meters can you swim before you just have that freestyle feel where you can just go. Efficiency diminishes drag, and then eventually we have to look at the piece of how much water can you physically move. And that third piece is really where I can help folks the most. That comes down to a coordinated body position that the anatomy of the shoulder can tolerate and move or purchase enough water to move through the water quickly and efficiently.
Okay, so why is the shoulder the weak link?
Because that's where our forward propulsion comes from. And it's an intimate relationship between the rotator cuff's ability to stabilize the shoulder so that our big, strong lat can move us through the water. And one without the other is a recipe for trouble. And I find that it's rotator cuff specific pretty much all the time. Simply the rotator cuff stabilize the humerus through the forward propulsion lats have to provide.
Yeah, I think that you put that very well, because I think a lot of people get this misconception that the rotator cuff are the muscles that are doing the movement, and they're not. They're the stabilizers,
No,
right? And if we
no,
don't
they have to hold the humerus still so that the big strong lat can generate the pull.
Yeah. So when we see people like doing exercises for the rotator cuff, they're not doing them to become, more powerful of a swimmer. It's more of a stability issue. I'd like to also add,
Right.
in my experience, it's not just the rotator cuffs as far as stability, because we also have the scapular stabilizers as well, I think, that are oftentimes underlooked, your serratus anterior and your rhomboids in particular, that are often
Right.
underappreciated for swimmers. Would you agree?
Those accessory muscles do get injured in
Yep.
swimmers, but when you really pop the hood on that shoulder, the rotator cuff is insufficient, and we're using those other muscles as a compensation. So I mainly train rotator cuff, and I think what's over the millennia of people doing rotator cuff exercises is we really think that it's a band job, these elastic bands. And I've been really trying to get deep into research on dryland programs to help some of these swim clubs out. And the dryland programs that are body weight oriented don't have better injury rates or performance. The dryland programs that use elastic bands exclusively that mimic swimming do have better performance, but they have more injuries. And then the exercise programs that are heavier have better performance and less injuries. So I feel like the rotator cuff exercises have to be heavy. And I think when that muscle group is stabilizing the humerus very, very firmly, and lats can produce the force, that there's far less pain and better performance, faster freestyle.
So I had a feeling I was going to be a fly on the wall tonight. And you two have such a great clinical background in lots of different areas, and both of you are really good with shoulder. And I know, Ron, you said you really this is one of your hot topics, so this is great. So I'm
Yeah.
going to take a step back. And I know you already did this, but if you would, just for our audience, explain the rotator cuff a little bit more. And then
Okay.
also we threw in scapular movement, so scapular humeral rhythm type of things. Let's dial that back just a little bit, just so people
Copy.
are up to speed a little bit on that part.
Okay. So the rotator cuff is a collection of 4 muscles that originate on the shoulder blade and attach onto the humerus. And we use the word cuff anytime that there's multiple muscles within the same sheath or covering. And basically they have one common job, which is to grab the head of the humerus and pull it deep inside the joint. And then they all have individual jobs, which is produce motion. The scapular stabilizer muscle's job is to hold the shoulder blade onto the rib cage. So we want a coordination of muscles holding the rib cage down, but yet allowing for normal range of motion. So our shoulder joint happens to be the most mobile joint in our body, which means that it relies on muscles for stability. There's really no bony blocks to keep it stable. We rely on muscles for that. And the secondary stabilizer is a capsule, which is thick connective tissue gristle that holds the humerus inside the socket. And then the third stabilizer is biceps, which is why we get so many biceps related injuries in swimmers. And it's because that rotator cuff's not doing its job and the capsule can't hold it down. So then our brain tries to use biceps to help stabilize the shoulder when it actually doesn't have the mechanical advantage to do so. But typically, rotator cuff is usually named in the injury itself.
I love it. Thank you. So then you're going into the issue of load placed on the shoulder to provide propulsion. At what point do you start trying to prevent injury, and what are some things that you even tried to prevent even an injury to the shoulder? Where does flexibility, I guess, come into play? You see swimmers doing all these, stretching drills or what have you.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Is that not? Where are we at?
My experience is that flexibility in the shoulder is a major significant detriment. The amount of flexibility in the shoulder directly correlates to the lack of stability. And I think that the more flexible you make it, the more wobbly you make it. And the more wobbly, the more long-term problem it has. What I think happens is the swimmers who provide a lot of flexibility get an immediate change in symptom relief, but then they trade that for an ongoing cycle of pain. And I find that the more that they strengthen that rotator cuff, the less of a cycle they have to go through. So it's a little bit longer relief in the short term, but it stops the chasing of your tail, so to speak.
So I'm going to push back just a little bit on this one, because if you don't have the flexibility to actually do the stroke,
well,
right,
we need normal motion,
right? And so I think that
as long as you have the motion to get through normal range.
That's what my pushback was. If you don't have that, you still have to address that. Right?
Yeah,
Assuming
if this person has normal range of motion to complete the full motion, I wouldn't want to stitch more motion than that.
I couldn't agree more. I just think it's important that people understand that if you're working with a coach and they're saying, hey, you can't get your hand high enough, and you're like, well, I'm trying, but I can't get my, right. You have to deal with that.
Yes, right? Absolutely. And I think the one place where we get the most sort of mistakes made on flexibility versus stability is when we start talking about our catch.
Yeah, agreed.
So as the arm enters the water, our rotator cuff is primarily responsible for stabilizing the humerus as we start this catch, and then lats has to take over and push us through. Well, this is oftentimes thought to be a flexibility detriment, but I find pretty much 100% of the time, they don't have the rotator cuff stability to be in that position. And that's where they start to get a clunking, where the bones just kind of smash together. And that's what offers the impingement that irritates the tendons.
Yeah, no, I
but
agree.
If you,
and what I tend to see sometimes, especially in triathletes that spend a lot of time on the bike and a lot of time running, is they don't have enough shoulder flexion. It's not the internal rotation deficit that they oftentimes are looking for, so that catch. It's that they just can't get their hands, like I have a very difficult time getting my hands or my arms to my ears. So therefore, when I enter, I'm entering too deep to begin with. And if I do enter the right position, then I actually have to over rotate. But you're right. I agree with you. I think that the internal rotation on catch, because there's not a lot you actually need there, right? If you think about the position you just put your hand in, you're in this typical like 90 position. Well, everyone can do that. right? That's not a limiter.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
I totally agree with you.
Well, just a little
And
history.
it really where it comes into trouble is as the shoulders rotate, we have this trunk that's providing a skate. That's really what creates this sort of moving target with regard to how that catch works. So yeah, I don't think that it ends up being a flexibility issue as often as it's a lack of stability.
And I was just going to offer
It is a moving target.
little historical perspective. Back in the old days, they were teaching a lot of thumb entry first, which actually does that internal rotation about the shoulder. But
Right.
then people started saying, wait a second, if you got shoulder impingement problems, don't do this. Enter the water with pinky first, which is so awkward to actually do. But it's actually a
Right.
really neat thing to try to think about and to actually work in, because it does actually put a little bit less stress on the shoulder at that point.
Yeah, it kind of starts to work again into that catch.
Yeah.
And you can actually purchase more water that way.
Mhm.
And the thumb entry folks were having a hard time with the carrying over.
Mhm.
You don't want to be midline. And as soon as it gets over midline, that's when that real big impingement moment happens.
Mhm.
So it's a tricky spacing there. I teach 10 and 2
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah, which is really wide. It feels wide, but it's probably a lot better than the old days where it was you're trying to reach out right in front. How about breathing side? Where does this come into play?
Breathing side with regard to shoulder injuries.
Yeah, yeah.
Boy, I don't have any input on that.
Okay.
Ted, you?
I think that, when you look in the research, if somebody only breathes to one side,
Mm-hmm.
they can create muscular imbalances and stability
Yeah.
issues. But I would go back to what you started here. If you have the strength and stability to do it, it's not necessarily as problematic. If you don't have it, I think it's more problematic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, I'm back to my club sport athletes. I don't really pick up any tendencies about that. And I think they're probably more guilty of breathing to one side than the triathletes are. Lake Mead, for us, for sure, you definitely need to be swimming with breathe in both directions, because one way is gonna suck with the way that our wind works and the way the water travels. You definitely need to be able to go both ways, otherwise you'll be drinking some water.
Yeah. Well, going back to your 3 things that you can swim faster on, this is a good thing triathletes can do, is swim 100 yards or meters, whichever pool they're in, breathing to one side, and then wearing your watch, and then do 100 yards swimming and breathing on the other side, and even check your performance one way or the other. So just a take home exercise for people to.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there's definitely
Ted.
something to that.
Ted, go ahead.
No, I agree with you, John. The one thing I would, because I do this, and the one thing I would kind of premise this by is, yeah, maybe you might be able to go the same speed, but what if you're working harder, right? So you're less efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you can actually do with like heart rate potentially, is look at your heart rate after that 100 or heart rate after 200 and train yourself when you're breathing the other way to maintain that efficiency. Because that's what we've talked about this a lot in triathlon, swimming in particular, is you want to be as efficient as possible and use the least amount of energy to get through the swim leg to go as fast as you can.
Yeah, and I think with the wetsuit, that keeping your mind quiet and being able to breathe easy and not have the resistance of the wetsuit increase your heart rate too much is definitely a skill developed over time.
Yeah. Okay, Ron. So we're just gonna peel the Band-Aid off. Okay, and here's the Band-Aid. You said we need to lift heavy to increase the strength of our rotator cuff. So can you outline what that program would look like? Because I can imagine all of our listeners are just waiting for this piece. And
Yes.
I think it's such an important part.
I'm happy to talk about it. So I basically have broken down the exercises into 3 tiers. And the first tier is injured rotator cuff. That's probably a different topic for today. We're not talking about the rehab of injured swimmers today. That would be tier 1. Tier 2 would be strength training for swimming. And when we really look at the physics of how the shoulder works, we see a lot of people want to do this type of stuff. Completely obsolete, I would say, at this point in time. Anything with our shoulder in this position, elbow down, obsolete, especially with bands. There are no studies to support it, and anatomically, it doesn't make any sense. The reason is if I have my arm above my shoulder, my rotator cuff is in a shortened position. And if I have it next to my elbow, it's in a lengthened position. So training it in one length and then using it in another length doesn't work. So what I have folks do is lay down on their belly, and you can probably just start with 2 pounds, maybe 3 pounds, laying down on your belly, with your arm at 90 degrees, and basically use a long lever. The palm flat will attack all 4 muscles of the rotator cuff at one time. Then we drop 1 pound and turn the thumb up, and we'll lift from there. That is supraspinatus specifically, so 1 muscle of the rotator cuff. And then with the arm at 120 degrees, thumb still facing up, another pound lighter. That is infraspinatus specifically. And when I say heavy weight, I just said 3, 2, and 1 pounds. So it's not crazy, but those are definitely enough load to poop that rotator cuff right out. And the one arm nature of the exercises calls in rotator cuff specifically. And if you do the same strategy for both arms, that would be the scapular stabilizers we were addressing earlier. Using 2 arms calls in scapular stabilizers, and then 1 arm only is rotator cuff specifically. And basically try to get them to a place where they can do 6 pounds, 5 pounds, and 4 pounds. And then once they can do that, then I can move them into tier 3, which adds new positions. And we actually start putting barbells above our head. So we do some heavy barbells there once rotator cuff is nice and stable.
Okay, I need you to slow it down a little bit, okay? Because I know what you're saying, but I think for it was a little bit quick, because you said at one point you're laying down on your belly.
Yes.
Okay.
So
those exercises you just gave us, were they all laying down on our belly, and it's just all we're doing is changing the hand position? Is that what you were saying?
Changing the arm position and changing the load.
Okay. So because it's hard, when we visualize,
I would probably start. Yes. So I'm laying down on my belly. My arm is at 90 degrees and my palm is flat.
Yep.
With 3 pounds. And then just like a 6-inch lift.
Yep.
And then thumb faces up, 1 pound less. So 2 pounds.
So how far off the
Probably
ground?
would do 3
if I'm laying on the ground, how far off the ground is my hand?
If you were laying on the ground, you probably would only lift 5 or 6 inches.
Okay. Okay. So are you maybe thinking that someone's like on a table then when you're doing this versus laying on the
It would
ground?
be a table or a ball,
Or a
or
bed?
if they're in the
Somebody-
gym, a
somebody at
bench.
home, maybe their bed, they can do it
Yeah.
on the side of their bed. Okay. All right.
Could do it on the bed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just for the people that are listening and they can't see this, can you tell us, is there a name
Ah.
that they could look this up and like see a YouTube video on it or?
I have not found any YouTube videos.
Time to
Oh,
make them.
I mean-
The researcher,
'em.
I need to. The researcher is Hughston Houston.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
So that's 20 years ago where I learned them was from a researcher named Houston. He put some needle in EMGs in people's rotator cuff and trashed
Yep.
a bunch of shoulders, but got some good information out of it.
Okay. No, I think that's very helpful. I think, yeah, and you just to, once again, we'll just describe this. So you're laying flat on the ground. Your arms are basically straight out like a T. So if you're laying down, you're like a T. You get your hand 4 or 5 inches off the ground. So you're basically pulling your hand off the ground. And then you're
Yes.
moving your hand kind of up and down like you were doing a jumping jack, but it's only about maybe 5 or 6 inches you're moving it up and down. Is that a good description?
The only thing I didn't like about that was jumping jack.
Okay. I'm trying to describe this
Laying
movement.
down on your belly, your palm is flat.
Yeah.
You're lifting your palm straight towards the ceiling. So it almost be like your hands are going behind you,
Okay.
as opposed to up like a jumping jack.
Okay, because what I was seeing you do was like this, but it's more back.
Yeah, so I would be on my belly.
Got it. Okay. I got it. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I think that helps. So yeah, I guess that how do we describe horizontal abduction?
Horizontal abduction.
So I guess,
Yes.
yeah, you can look that up if you're following along at home. Basically, he's describing horizontal abduction. Yes.
I was looking to see if
I found
somebody
it.
had it.
There's these are the Houston shoulder strengthening exercises. Is this what you're talking about, Ron?
Okay, yes, right there. Houston
Okay.
6. Okay, so number 1 there is what I call position 1. That's palm is flat. Yeah, wow, look at
Okay.
you.
John's good,
Um,
isn't he?
Good. All right. I'll
Position
post it.
2 is the same arm slot, but your thumb faces up.
Yep.
And then in position 3 there, that's that thumb should be facing up.
Okay. And you do it with holding weights.
That's the arm slot.
Okay. And you do it with holding
Yeah,
weights.
position 1 is the heaviest.
Okay.
So it goes,
I
you said 6, 5, 4.
Yeah, so they did position 3, palm flat and thumb up. I've actually never done it palm flat.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Well, I
Go
love
back.
that heavy weights is like a pound. That's great.
Yeah, oh yeah. 654 is all my professional pitchers, all my Olympic caliber swimmers. That's the most they can handle, 654.
Uh-huh.
Well, John, maybe you could put a link to that in our chat when we.
Yeah, I just put it in there.
I think that's a good reference for people,
Yeah.
especially if you're listening and you can go back and look at this and just get those pictures later, because I think that was really good. And then Ron, maybe what we'll do is I'll come by and we'll do a YouTube video
Yeah.
and produce this and get some hits.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've been toying with this, like, how much do I give out?
Yeah.
Oh. It's hard, right? Like that's the hardest part about what all of us do, right? Is think about it.
Yeah.
John and I, we're professors, we teach for a living, and then every Friday night we come on and talk for free. Right.
Right.
But I
But-
still think that what we're doing is for the greater good.
I was
For
going
sure,
to
for sure.
I was going to add in somewhere we need a disclaimer because it's one thing to
For
look
sure.
at these exercises and know that they're there, But it's another thing to work with someone, get the feedback. Are you doing it right? This is the problem with swimming
Well,
is
that's
you
that's
can't
my
see yourself.
concern more so than, more so than giving away the secret sauce is I don't want somebody to get a hold of these really powerful exercises and then not utilize them correctly
That
and
right,
not get out of it what they potentially can.
right.
Because somebody from tier 1 to tier 3, takes me about 6 weeks. So really what we're trying to do with this 1 hour podcast is give you 6 weeks worth of a progression
Right.
when everybody's going to bring a different starting place to the mix.
Yeah.
So, it's impossible to give away that whole bit and
Yeah.
be accurate and not overstep.
And
Because someone,
we're also making this assumption that everyone's starting at zero,
Yeah.
right? And that's where a clinician like yourself or like myself can assess somebody, and maybe they're at a 2 already, right? And so the progression starts there. They've never had a shoulder issue before, and they're actually relatively stable. Maybe they started in a different position. And that's true clinician piece, right? Anyone can go online and find shoulder exercises. And I mean, this is the world we're
I
living
mean,
in.
especially with swimming, thousands of YouTube videos on swimming.
yeah.
Exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the clinicians and the coaches with years and years of experience are invaluable, right? It's wisdom that's built
Yeah.
up in that person. I mean, Ron, I'm just going to throw this out there. You have probably read, I don't know, 300 articles on shoulders and swimming and muscle activation. And here's the thing, what you've come up with is a culmination of all of that knowledge, right? And the practical application of that knowledge, which to me is exponentially more valuable than any YouTube video, because the truth of the matter is, as a clinician, you failed many times.
Yes.
And you've learned from those failures. And so now
around here we call that practicing physical therapy.
Exactly. But what you have and what a good clinician has is, and I always come back to the word wisdom, right? And you've built that up, and a YouTube video or reading something on Google there's no wisdom to that. There's no depth. There's no depth to it. Even if Ron Gallagher was to sit and write a blog article or make a video, there's still it's 2-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional. And I think that Ron, you're right. This is really important that we have this content.
It's really a challenge because my social media, I want to be more of a person this is what you should do than this is what you shouldn't do. I'm not trying to just poo-poo everybody, but at the same time, the physics of the shoulder, the nature of the dumbbells and the way that the shoulder is being stressed is what changes performance and injuries. And like I just can't stress it enough that it has to be dumbbells and it has to be load. It just cannot be rubber bands. I mean, the anatomy doesn't work like that. The physics, the way that the rotator cuff is loaded doesn't work like that. It's just a big missing piece in the way that dry land programs are being developed. And I have 1,000 swimmers to prove it. And it's really frustrating when, you can pull up 100 YouTube videos and see just nothing but crummy exercises.
Well, and I'll take it one more step in terms of the importance of the clinician. And this podcast does not replace the clinician. It's one thing to see the exercises, to know the exercises, but even as we started this discussion, we talked about load management. And the clinician is going to be monitoring that load and know the load over a period of time and how these exercises even fit into a regular training program. And that, trying to pull all those pieces together, I mean, that's a pretty big AI program to be able to do.
Yeah.
And we can't replace that level of knowledge that clinicians have to say, okay, today is the day to do these exercises for these reasons, knowing the load. and tomorrow it's going to be this, and when do you do these exercises relative to swimming and so forth. All that needs to get worked out, and that's where you do need a
For
clinician.
sure.
I think this
For
podcast
sure.
is great at least identifying some issues that swimmers should watch for or maybe incorporate, and then work with a clinician on how to do this. Let me throw in one more factor, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this part. One of your three things that make a swimmer faster is feel. And I'm wondering how your thoughts in doing these exercises or doing a strengthening program may be different or the same for adult onset swimmers versus swimmers who have been swimming all their lives. Does that factor in at all?
Yeah, one thing that I hear pretty much from everybody is it takes me about 200 meters to warm up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a period of time where like my shoulders just are like loosey goose, and then all of a sudden 200, 300 meters in, I feel like I'm in my flow. Well, I think that's a rotator cuff deficiency complaint. And I think adult onset swimmers who start with the strength program, and especially a rotator cuff forward program for triathletes, that will be diminished. And I think if you have a coach who's struggling with your stroke, you can avoid a lot of those mistakes just by being stronger. And, a lot of times, your entry into the water and how everything is flowing and how much you're skating and, your trunk rotation and all that is all the strength. It's all a strength limitation. And adult swimmers who are learning to swim later on in life, they have the sitting in a computer desk and the, just the lack of conditioning that, a lot of these kid swimmers don't have. So they're at a bit of a disadvantage that way. And, we think, well, it's horizontal, you're in the water feels great, the buoyancy, all of those things make it feel like it's not that taxing on you. But starting that process with some rotator cuff stability eliminates a lot of the growing pains. And each session you can get more out of if you're stronger and that ability to purchase water is there, so that you can run that feel. And that's where the efficiency comes with attention to detail. And I think that comes, after the strength is there. And then it kind of morphs and morphs and morphs. It's almost like in cycling when we have to push a bigger gear to get the same we're getting so efficient now, we have to push a bigger gear. It's like once you reach a certain fitness level, your gears change. Same thing can happen with swimming with regard to how strong you are and your ability to be efficient.
Okay, so I have a question that's been posed to me, and I know how I answer it, but I'm going to see how you answer it.
Okay.
So when we do a strength program, like for anything, it could be your shoulders, it could be your hips, it could be your calf, anything. And let's say we do, I don't know, 3 sets of 30, just for some random number. How does that translate into swimming 4,000 meters? Right. So I do like 90 or like 90 reps, or let's say typically 3 sets of 10 is what people do. I don't agree with that, but that's what people do. How can I translate doing 30 to doing a 4,000? Do you see what I'm saying? So
so if I did a rotator cuff exercise for 3 times 30, how does that convert to swimming?
Swimming 4,000. I can see how it might be
100. Yeah, right? I would say no effect whatsoever. So a resistance to load ratio of 3 times 30 has a conditioning effect, which means that the connective tissue that surrounds the tendon is going to be what's being taxed. When you get into the water, I would say that your connective tissue is not going to do much in that environment. You want muscles to generate the propulsion. So a 3x5, a 3x8 load is what translates best to swim. Because you really are trying to purchase water. You're trying to have a force that grabs onto molecules of water to push past you.
Okay.
You
So
push against the load.
yeah, I agree. So, but let's say I do 3x6, right? And
Okay.
I get stronger. I get stronger at doing 3x6. Do I also get stronger at doing 1x4,000?
Yes.
Okay.
But maybe not all. I mean, that's going to make you fatigue resistant over that 4,000 meters. And let's say you do that over the course of 6 weeks. I think over the course of 6 weeks of 3x5, you will be fatigue resistant at 4,000 meters.
So, and why I'm asking is because once again, you read blog posts about this and they're talking about specificity of training. And
Right.
3x8 is not specific to 1x4,000.
Right.
So where does this crossover happen in your mind? Because this is not solved science.
Right. No, no, this is a really good discussion, because if you would have asked me this question 8 years ago, I would have a very different opinion.
And this is the wisdom. That's what we're asking you.
It's only because of, the hundreds of runners I've run through a 3x5 scheme that I know that building your stress tolerance past the load you want to utilize it at is where the gains are. So if we think about the amount of force that happens in one catch, and then you multiply that times 4,000, well, that's not the load you're trying to withstand. You're trying to have enough stress resistance in one pool that one pool is not going to make you fatigued. And then you multiply that times 4,000 and you're fatigue resistant over that time. So I think the strengthening when I say strengthening, I mean the 3x5 rep scheme is far superior in that environment over time. One time's not going to help you go 4,000, but 3 times a week's going to help you go 4,000, especially if you do that for 6 weeks.
Agreed. Okay, good. No, it's so interesting, right? Because this is not solved, and this is very much a difficult thing to solve in the world. So I really appreciate
for sure. Multifactorial.
Well, and I got to jump in here, Ted. I think you're just trying to get out of swimming a 1x4,000. So.
No, I'm not.
I love my 1x4,000.
Well, I guess in an Ironman.
Or he doesn't want to move a heavy barbell.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it's not that I don't want to, it's I can't. So
They are heavy.
So then let's go down the next path, and John already alluded to it, is when should I do this? If I'm swimming 3 or 4 times a week as an age group triathlete, I'm biking 3 or 4 times a week, I'm running 3 or 4 times a week, I'm doing strength training for my lower body. Now my time bucket is getting dang full. I'm gonna have to quit my job. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Just train full time.
My wife heard me and she said no. My job.
Like John is really good at bringing us back. This is a training age question. If this is my first year, that's a different answer than if this is my 10th year and I'm, a world championship caliber, right? It's different. And John's got Oceanside here in the next couple of weeks. His answer is different than if, Oceanside was last week. So my answer is that it's periodized. It's periodized with regard to where your A race is and where your training age is and what you're trying to get out of your strength program. I do believe that in the beginning of the 12-week buildup or the 15-week buildup to a big, say 70.3, that there should be 2 heavy lifting days in those weeks compared to the last 3 weeks where there should be no heavy days. Um, if you are getting to your heavy rotator cuff work once or twice a week, that you do heavy Houstons and T's, Y's, and I's as a way of warming up for your heavy stuff. And then when you swim, you do it light. So you know the injured swimmers that I've treated at the pool because they're bent over the bench with a 2-pounder doing their Houstons as a warm-up. Very, very light before they get into the water. And they swim pain-free and they don't have that 200-meter warm-up issue. And they're right on task right when they start because their rotator cuff is turned up when they get in the water. So we do it light before we swim and then heavy on your heavy day in the gym is how I would prescribe it.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good. And you're right. It's all contextual, right? Like it's where you are, it's who you are, it's when you are.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Once again,
my first sprint triathlon is different than Ted's, 15th half iron, and he's just at a different place with his training.
Good.
How about working in, triathletes and swimmers are famous for having lots of toys that they bring to the depth.
Yeah.
Paddles, fins, arm bands, what have you. How do paddles working?
I think if you get me and a swim coach and a triathlon coach in the room, we'll just go round and round and round and round forever. Nobody's going to be right, nobody's going to be wrong. It comes down to those 3 things, your efficiency, your ability to move water, and your feel. And I think paddles can give you that. I think you probably have to have some foundational muscle strength to do paddles well, to do them, smart. Because the thing about the paddles is you're taking the most distal segment from your shoulder, the furthest away, and you're loading that spot. So you're actually increasing your rotator cuff demand by a significant amount. And there has to be a foundation of strength to be able to tolerate that. And I'm not sure the majority of folks who are doing heavy paddle work have that stability. And then there's something to be said for the buoys and all that stuff, fins and all that are, working individual aspects of a whole body thing. So I tend to not be big proponents on toys, because when the gun goes off and you dive into that water in the middle of a triathlon, it's a whole body experience, and I think you need to be really efficient at that whole body method of swimming. And I'm not sure that the individual pieces always add up the way we think it does.
I love that, and I'll circle back to what you talked about going down and swimming at the lake. And once you put a wetsuit on or you use these different toys, you swim a little bit different. And
Yeah,
on one hand, that might help with the feel of water. On the other hand, it's
right.
putting in this case, your rotator cuff in a stress differently.
That's what I mean. The swim coaches believe that moving around and training each one of those individual pieces helps with your feel.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found coaches who don't want any toys, they want anything, the only swing freestyle, don't even want you to swim backstroke and butterfly and all that. You just become a freestyle expert. And then the swim coach is going to say, well, I mean, how can they develop feel if they don't know how to go backwards and they don't know how to go with a butterfly?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an individual thing. It comes down to, how much swim skill you have and like what your goals are, I do see a lot of triathletes who are trying to cut down the time in their swim as a way of improving the overall performance of the race. And, sometimes they're just going to have to swim twice as much to get that change. And, I don't know that that's the best use of their time.
Mm-hmm.
So, really an individual thing. And it comes down to, where does it fit in the training? And, you know, is that an off season or an in season thing? You know, off season wise, you know, that's a awesome way to handle it, but in season, maybe not the best. So I think it comes down to the individual and how it's periodized in.
No, I think that's all good. The only thing I'll say is that I can't swim double what what I'm already swimming. But I would, you know, well, and the truth is, like, you're right. Like, I think that it's an important thing to also be okay with where you're at sometimes in swimming, because the amount of volume it takes to increase. And John and I've talked about this before many times. If John wants to get 5 minutes faster in his Ironman swim, he's gonna have to triple his volume.
Right.
And he's got way more bang for his buck by adding that time into his bike, right? Or
absolutely,
probably more into anyone's bike. And so as a triathlete, I think you can get to an age group or get to a certain point where you're like, you know what? Because for me, like, I'm like, swimming is my weakest thing, but if I can get a 33-minute half Ironman swim, I'm in the race, right? And for me to get to a 30, it's going to take so many more yards, and it's just probably not worth it. Nope, did I lose you?
I mean, you know, an individual has a coach. The coach, you know, it's like a whole team decision. Like, how do we attack this problem? You know, if you want a 33 swim, but your swim is 37, you know, it might behoove you to take a bike away, take a run away, and use those days to swim. But, you know, it might also be, you know, let's just concentrate on that in the off season, and let's bump our shoulder strength way up. Let's get in the water 4 or 5 times a week, and let's really hammer this out. And then, you know, season comes. All right, now we have this swim efficiency established, this water feel established. We're moving more water. Now we're performing better in the swim. Let's dial back on the swim and see if we can keep that, and then increase the run fitness or whatever. And you know, that's why we love this sport.
Yep.
Because all of those options, you know, all of those are, you know, potential ways to make this work better. But if you do need more swim, you're going to need more shoulder strength.
Yep, agreed. Okay, well, we're coming up to an hour. Ron, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to leave you with one more question, and that is just.
I'll make it brief.
Okay, no, you can take as much time as you want.
Okay.
You're the one that you look like you're the only one at work, so.
No, all my people are gone.
So what would be your kind of like your parting message for people with their shoulders and swimming? If you just give us like one little parting synopsis.
I would say your swim performance depends on your shoulder's ability to tolerate stress, whether that's your training stress and how many meters or yards you're swimming, and what your accessory work is like to support that load. That balance is how healthy your swim is going to be, I'd say.
Awesome.
I love it. I like that of talking about healthy swimming, because once you do get injured, it takes a long time to get back. And so doing everything you can to be healthy as a swimmer and happy shoulders is a good thing.
Yep, agreed. You know, I think we talked about it before. I had a bike crash and separated my shoulder 3-4 years ago now. And it took me about almost 3 years to get my shoulder back to where I could swim without pain. Obviously, I had an acute injury that led to that, but it was the acute injury caused decreased stability. And so I did a lot of work, stability work, to get to a point where I think now I can actually swim pain-free. But I also had to go back to only swimming 1,500 yards a time, and lower the volume, lower everything, and then really slow build up. And it literally took a year of concentrated building to now I'm still only swimming 3,000 a session, but I'm doing it without pain, and I'm happy with that. Right? If I can do, for me, 3,000 a week, and it doesn't hurt, and I'm good, and I can be consistent, I'm winning.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. How long were you immobile?
I was only immobile for like 10 days. And then I started rehabbing, I was rehabbing even when I was immobilized, you know what I mean? Like doing range of
Right,
motion.
right. Right,
But
right.
I didn't swim for 8 weeks.
Hmm.
And yeah. And then when I came back, the problem is, and you know this, like when you come
It
back from
hurts.
injury like that, your fitness is still good. Like my cardiovascular fitness was still good. Even my muscular endurance
Right.
was okay. And it was better than my stability.
Right.
Right. And so then
Right.
I went through this chronic cycle of injury and rehab and injury and rehab. And I had to eventually just start back from square one. And once I did that, then good things happened. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyways, hey,
Yeah. That's a challenging scenario. Broken bones in swimmers,
Yeah.
they're tough injuries to overcome.
well, especially when your mechanics end up changing, because my clavicle is still higher than the other side, right? So there's
Mhm.
Right.
actually something mechanically different.
Right. Right.
And when you have that, or you break a bone and now the bone is just a little bit different, we see this in
Right.
runners all the time. They broke their ankle when they were a kid, and those mechanical problems are something that are way more difficult to overcome.
Absolutely.
Well, we covered a lot of
Right.
ground tonight.
It's making the
Mhm.
compensations normal for you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, yes,
So
we did
do
cover.
maybe we should do a clinic, you guys, where we actually come and do these exercises.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a great
Yeah.
idea. We should, for sure. Yep, I like it. Let's pencil it in. Well, hey, Ron, John, both of you, thank you for another awesome podcast, and awesome Friday night. I
Yeah.
think
Thanks for
now
having me, guys.
Ron may be on the record now for being on the most episodes of the Evidence-Based Triathlete. So
That's right.
Hey, that's awesome.
being the record holder.
We always have a good discussion.
Yeah.
We absolutely do, and it's always very educational for us, and I hope so. I hope for our listeners as well. So I hope you both
Same.
have a good weekend. Stay out of the wind.
Yep.
Good luck in Oceanside, y'all.
All right,
Oh,
thank you.
we got a few weeks, so we'll probably talk before that, but thank you. Yeah. All
Have a
right.
great night, guys.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.